You've lost your temper and said something you can never take back. You've lain awake at 3 a.m., replaying a conversation from 6 years ago. You've watched your anxiety hijack a moment that should have been beautiful. What if the problem was never your circumstances, but the fact that no one ever taught you how to own your own mind? What if the problem was never your circumstances, but the fact that no one ever taught you how to own your own mind? Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the channel dedicated to ancient wisdom that doesn't just fill your mind, but fundamentally reshapes the way you move through the world. If you're new here, stay. What you're about to hear may be the most quietly powerful thing you encounter this year. Let's begin with a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. How much of your day do you actually choose, and how much of it just happens to you? Think carefully before you answer. You wake up and immediately reach for your phone. You didn't decide to, it was automatic. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and your blood pressure spikes before your rational mind even registers what occurred. A coworker makes a passive-aggressive comment in a meeting, and you spend the next 4 hours mentally composing the perfect comeback. Your partner says something careless at dinner, and the rest of your evening is quietly poisoned. None of those were decisions. They were reactions. And here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of Stoic philosophy, a truth that Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in the middle of the night, that Epictetus discovered in chains, that Seneca returned to again and again across decades of letters. Most human suffering is not caused by what happens to us. It is caused by what we tell ourselves about what happens to us. The Stoics lived in one of the most volatile periods in human history: plague, political assassination, military conquest, exile, poverty, slavery. These were not abstract, philosophical problems. They were the daily realities against which Stoicism was forged. And what the Stoics discovered wasn't a way to escape the chaos of the world. They discovered something far more radical, a way to become unmoved by it. Not cold, not detached, not indifferent, unmoved. There is a profound difference between someone who suppresses their emotions, who buries them like embers until they explode, and someone who has trained themselves to process emotion with clarity, to feel it fully without being governed by it. The first person is brittle. The second is made of something close to iron. The Stoics called this second state apatheia, not apathy in the modern, empty sense, but something closer to emotional sovereignty. The ability to experience the full range of human feeling and remain, beneath it all, the author of your own response. Today we are going to give you the practical architecture of that sovereignty. Not theory, not inspiration, architecture. 10 daily habits drawn directly from the Stoic tradition that, practiced consistently, will begin to change the fundamental relationship you have with your own emotional life. By the end of this video, you won't just understand Stoicism differently. You will see a path, concrete, daily, actionable, toward becoming someone whose inner life is genuinely, durably their own. Let's begin. Habit 1. The morning audit. Here is how most people begin their day. The alarm sounds. Before consciousness has fully returned, their hand has already found the phone. Within 90 seconds, they are reading about a political crisis they cannot influence, responding to an email that could wait 6 hours, scrolling images of lives that aren't theirs. They are already reactive, already emotionally hijacked, before they have spoken a single word or drawn a single intentional breath. The Stoics would have considered this a form of madness. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the known world, commanding an empire of 60 million people, began every single morning not with dispatches or demands, but with a private audit of his own soul. In Book 2 of the Meditations he writes to himself, "In the morning when thou risest unwillingly, let this thought be present: I am rising to the work of a human being." He didn't begin the day assuming it would be easy. He began it prepared for it to be difficult, and in that preparation lay an extraordinary power. The morning audit is simple. It requires nothing more than 5 to 10 minutes and something to write with. But what happens inside those minutes is the difference between living reactively and living with intention. You ask yourself 3 questions, and you answer them honestly, not aspirationally. First, what is trying to disturb my peace today? Name it specifically. Not I'm anxious, but I'm anxious because I have a difficult conversation with my manager at 2 o'clock and I fear it will go badly. The Stoics understood that unnamed fear has enormous power. Named fear becomes manageable. You've taken it out of the shadows and placed it in the light. Second, what is within my control today and what is not? This is the central axis of Stoic philosophy, the dichotomy of control, which Epictetus called the very foundation of wisdom. He opens the Enchiridion with it. Some things are in our control and others not. Your attitude is in your control. Your effort is in your control. Your response to whatever happens, that is in your control. The weather, other people's behavior, the economy, your reputation in other people's minds, none of that is yours. The morning audit helps you locate yourself clearly on one side of that line or the other, so you don't spend precious emotional energy trying to govern what was never yours to govern. Third, who do I want to be today? Not what do I want to achieve, but who do I want to be? Patient, honest, generous, present. Choose one quality and carry it into the day like a compass. Marcus Aurelius did this. Seneca did this. Epictetus taught it. And what's remarkable is that modern neuroscience, centuries later, has arrived at the same place. Intentional morning reflection activates the prefrontal cortex, strengthening the neural architecture of deliberate response over impulsive reaction. The Stoics didn't have brain scans, but they understood the mechanism in their bones. The day you begin with intention is a different day than the one you simply fall into. That is habit 1. Habit 2, the space between. There is a sentence attributed to Viktor Frankl, a man who survived the Nazi concentration camps and built an entire philosophy from the experience that is so important, so quietly revolutionary that I want you to sit with it before we continue. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Frankl may not have been a Stoic, but he was describing the beating heart of Stoic practice. The Stoics called it the pause. Epictetus called it one of the most demanding disciplines a human being could undertake. Marcus Aurelius, in his private journals, returned to it dozens of times, because he kept finding how difficult it was. Even for him, even as emperor, he had senators who infuriated him, commanders who disappointed him, courtiers who flattered him, and generals who lied to him. And he wrote to himself again and again, pause, examine, then respond. Here is the biological reality beneath the philosophy. When you perceive a threat, emotional, social, physical, your amygdala fires before your prefrontal cortex can intervene. This happens in milliseconds. Your heart rate spikes. Cortisol floods your system. Your body prepares for combat or retreat. Before your conscious mind has even registered what's happening. This is why you say things you regret. This is why you cry before you understand why you're crying. This is why an email can ruin your entire afternoon. The Stoic practice of the pause is, in neurological terms, the deliberate activation of executive function over limbic reactivity. You are, through practice, literally rewiring which part of your brain governs your behavior. But how? The Stoics use something almost embarrassingly simple: the breath, not as mysticism, as mechanics. Before responding to anything that provokes you, before the sharp reply, before the defensive email, before the raised voice, you take one single, slow, deliberate breath. That breath does several things simultaneously. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, physiologically lowering your arousal. It creates a micro-pause that gives your prefrontal cortex time to come online. And crucially, it signals to yourself that you are choosing your response rather than being driven by it. Marcus Aurelius writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The power he's describing isn't dramatic. It doesn't look powerful from the outside. It looks like a pause, a breath, a moment of stillness before words come. But in that moment, that is where freedom lives. Practice the pause today, specifically with the things that most reliably provoke you. Notice what happens when you insert even 2 seconds of space. Not suppression, not performance of calm, just space. That is habit 2. Habit 3, the evening review. Seneca, one of the most practical of the Stoic teachers, describes a ritual he observed every single night of his adult life. In a letter to his friend Lucilius, he writes, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of the habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by." He then asks himself 3 questions, questions so penetrating that 2,000 years later, they remain among the most psychologically honest tools of self-examination ever devised. Question 1. Where did I fall short today? Not in the spirit of self-punishment. The Stoics were clear on this, their harsh self-judgment without constructive direction is simply another form of emotional indulgence. They asked where they fell, short in the spirit of a craftsman, examining their own work. Clinical, honest, forward-looking. Where was I reactive when I could have been deliberate? Where did fear govern me instead of reason? Where did I say yes when I should have said no, or no when I should have said yes? Question 2. What went well today? This is not toxic positivity. This is careful, honest inventory. Seneca believed that we learn as much from our successes as our failures, perhaps more, because we tend to understand why something worked when we felt it working. Where did I hold my composure? Where did I serve someone well? Where was I the person I intend to be? Question 3. What will I do differently tomorrow? Not a vague resolution, a specific intention. If I lost my temper at dinner, I don't write, "Be more patient." I write, "When the conversation at dinner begins to escalate, I will take a breath and ask a question instead of making a statement." Specificity is everything. The Stoics understood that virtue is a practice, not a feeling, and practices require precision. Benjamin Franklin, who was deeply influenced by Stoic philosophy, called his version of this the moral ledger. He kept it for decades. Thomas Jefferson did the same. These men understood, as Seneca understood, that character is not inherited. It is built through daily honest examination. The evening review takes 10 minutes. Most people waste twice that time watching videos they didn't choose and can't remember. 10 minutes. Every evening, examining the one life you are actually responsible for. That is habit 3. A Stoic is not a person who does not feel. This is perhaps the most damaging misunderstanding of the entire tradition. The Stoics did not teach the suppression of emotion. They did not teach indifference. They did not teach the building of walls around the heart. Marcus Aurelius grieved the deaths of his children. He lost several. He writes about grief with a rawness that is startling to encounter. Seneca describes love, friendship, the bittersweet passage of time, with the emotional depth of a poet. Epictetus, a former slave, writes about human dignity and freedom with the passion of someone who understands exactly what it costs. What the Stoics taught was not the elimination of feeling, but the refinement of it. The difference between being swept away by a current and being a skilled swimmer moving through it. You feel everything. You are moved by everything. You remain beneath the motion, the swimmer, not the debris. Remember this as we continue, because every habit we're about to discuss serves that end. Not coldness, but mastery. Not detachment, but depth. Habit 4, negative visualization, or what the Stoics called premeditatio malorum. This is, without question, the most counterintuitive practice in the entire Stoic tradition, and arguably the most powerful. Here is the practice. Once each day, take a few minutes to deliberately imagine losing something you love. Before you resist, hear this carefully. This is not pessimism. It is not morbid. It is not a form of anxiety. It is, in fact, the direct antidote to the chronic emotional numbing that comes from taking our lives for granted. Seneca writes, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day." Marcus Aurelius writes, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." And Epictetus, bluntly as was his way, tells his students, "When you kiss your child good-night, whisper to yourself, 'This child may not be here tomorrow,' not to induce fear, but to ensure you are fully present for the kiss that is actually happening." Modern psychology calls this practice hedonic adaptation reversal. We are wired, deeply biologically wired, to habituate to the good things in our lives. The new job becomes routine in 3 months. The house you saved for becomes simply where you live. The partner you chose becomes someone you pass in the hallway. We stop seeing our lives because familiarity makes us blind. Negative visualization is the antidote to that blindness. When you spend 30 seconds imagining, genuinely imagining, a world without something you currently have, 2 things happen. First, the anxiety you might have felt about that thing typically decreases because you've looked directly at the possibility and found that you can, in fact, face it. And second, when you return to the present moment, what was ordinary has become luminous. The coffee, the voice on the phone, the person sitting across from you, the fact that you are breathing. Do this once a day, not for long, 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Choose something different each time. Your health, a relationship, your work, an ability you rely on. Look at it clearly, feel its potential absence, then open your eyes to its presence. You will not live the same way after that practice, not because life has changed, but because you have. That is habit 4. Habit 5, voluntary discomfort. Seneca writes something that has unsettled comfortable people for 2 millennia. Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content, with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" The Stoics practiced voluntary hardship, not as punishment, not as masochism, but as deliberate emotional training. Their reasoning was precise. If you only ever experience comfort, your nervous system begins to define comfort as the baseline of existence, and anything below it as catastrophe. The Stoic who occasionally chose hardship was building something the comfortable person never could. The knowledge, in their bones, that they could endure. The modern equivalent doesn't require dramatic sacrifice. It requires deliberate, regular exposure to manageable difficulty. Cold showers. Not because cold showers are magical, but because they train the fundamental capacity to choose discomfort over avoidance. Skipping a meal occasionally, not for weight loss, but to discover that hunger is uncomfortable, not catastrophic. Walking when you would drive. Silence when you would fill it with noise. The conversation you've been avoiding. The apology you owe. The work you've been postponing because it's hard. Each small act of voluntary discomfort does 2 things simultaneously. It builds what the Stoics called fortitude, genuine resilience, not performed toughness, and it systematically deflates the power that comfort addiction holds over your decisions. Marcus Aurelius, who lived in palatial luxury as emperor, was known to sleep on a soldier's pallet and eat plain food. Not because he had to, because he understood that the man who needs comfort to function is a hostage to circumstance, and he refused to be a hostage to anything. Choose one form of voluntary discomfort today, something small but genuine, and as you sit in it, say, as Seneca said, "Is this the condition I feared?" You will find, almost every time, that the answer is no. That is habit 5. Habit 6, the view from above, or the practice of perspective. Marcus Aurelius describes a practice he returned to consistently throughout the meditations, something he called the view from above. In Book 9 he writes, "Look at the immensity of space and time, and fix your attention on an infinitely small portion of it." He would step back mentally, first from the immediate moment, then from the day, then from his reign, then from Rome, then from history, then from the planet itself, until his current anxiety, his current conflict, his current grief, was placed against a backdrop so vast that its true proportions became clear. This is not nihilism. Marcus Aurelius was not saying that nothing matters. He was saying something far more precise, that most of the things we allow to dominate our emotional lives are not proportional to the weight we assign them. The colleague who disrespected you in a meeting, the post that didn't get the response you hoped for, the conversation that went sideways, the recognition you didn't receive, placed against the backdrop of the universe, against even the backdrop of your own life at 80, looking back. How much of what is consuming you right now will matter? This question is not meant to diminish real pain. Grief is real. Injustice is real. Loss is real. The practice of perspective doesn't trivialize these. It contains them. It places them in a frame large enough that they don't obliterate everything else. Do this today. When something grips you, something that spikes your pulse, tightens your chest, narrows your vision, take 30 seconds and ask, in 5 years, will this matter? In 50? In 500? Some things will survive the question. Honor those, but most won't. And for those that don't, let the perspective do what it was designed to do, liberate you. That is habit 6. Habit 7, the discipline of speech. Epictetus wrote, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." Marcus Aurelius, in his private journals, repeatedly criticizes himself for talking too much, not for gossip or cruelty, but for the simple failure to guard his words with the same care he guarded his thoughts. He writes, "Let silence be the general rule, or let only what is necessary be said." The Stoics understood something that modern life has almost entirely forgotten. Speech is action. Every word you speak either serves your integrity or erodes it. Every complaint that escapes your lips rehearses a narrative of victimhood. Every piece of gossip you traffic in weakens your own character in ways you don't immediately feel but deeply accumulate. The Stoic discipline of speech is not silence for its own sake. It is intentionality, the practice of asking, before you speak, is this true? Is this necessary? Does this serve what I'm trying to build? It applies to complaints. The Stoics were not opposed to acknowledging difficulty, but they drew a sharp distinction between observation and complaint. Observation informs and clarifies. Complaint rehearses suffering without resolving it. Every unnecessary complaint is a small act of self-harm. It applies to gossip, perhaps more urgently than anything else. When you speak poorly of someone who is absent, you are not actually injuring them. You are practicing the habit of cruelty, and that habit does not stay quarantined to the absent person. It colonizes you, and it applies to venting, the modern epidemic of mistaking emotional discharge for emotional processing. Real processing leads to insight. Venting without reflection simply keeps the wound open. Today, practice this. Before speaking, a half-second pause. Is this true? Is this necessary? Does this serve me or diminish me? You will catch yourself in surprising places. And what you find there, what you are about to say before the pause, will teach you more about yourself than almost any other practice in this list. That is habit 7. Habit 8. Service, living for something larger than yourself. Marcus Aurelius writes, "What injures the hive injures the bee." The Stoics held a philosophy of cosmopolitanism, the belief that every human being is first and foremost a citizen of the world, bound to every other human by the shared fact of reason and humanity. This was not a vague sentiment. It was a daily obligation. And this, perhaps more than any other Stoic teaching, cuts against the grain of the individualistic, self-optimization culture that surrounds us. Every book on the shelf tells you to maximize your potential, build your brand, optimize your performance. And the Stoics would not dismiss personal development. They practiced it rigorously, but they understood, with absolute clarity, that a life turned entirely inward is a life that is slowly suffocating. Seneca writes, "Retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who are likely to improve you. And then, critically, do not abandon the public arena. Involvement, contribution, service." These are not optional components of the good life in Stoic philosophy. They are constitutive of it. You cannot be fully virtuous in isolation. Virtue, for the Stoics, is always directed outward, toward the good of others, toward the health of the community, toward something that will outlast you. The habit here is simple but demanding. Find one way, each day, to serve something beyond your own immediate interest. It doesn't have to be grand. Answer a question with genuine patience. Offer help without being asked. Check on the person who seems fine but probably isn't. Do your work with the consciousness that it affects real human beings. Marcus Aurelius, who could have been the most selfish man in Rome, and no one could have stopped him, chose service as his daily discipline. He writes, "Do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about other people. Look inward." And then, in what sounds like a contradiction, but is actually a paradox, you were born for the sake of others. The Stoics lived inside that paradox, and found it not contradictory, but complete. That is habit 8. Habit 9, amor fati, the love of fate. Friedrich Nietzsche, who was deeply shaped by the Stoics, coined the phrase, but the practice is older. It runs through the Meditations like a spine. Marcus Aurelius writes, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." This is, perhaps, the most demanding teaching in the entire Stoic canon, and the most transformative. Amor fati, the love of fate, is not resignation. It is not passive acceptance. It is something far more active, far more radical. It is the decision to not merely endure what happens, not merely tolerate it, but to actively want it, to treat every circumstance, including every setback, every loss, every humiliation, every failure, as raw material for growth. The Stoics observed something in human psychology that therapy is still working to articulate fully. Our relationship to difficulty is more important than the difficulty itself. Two people can experience the same loss. One is destroyed by it. One is deepened by it. The difference is not the loss. It is the relationship. Amor fati is the practice of deliberately shifting that relationship, not in a single dramatic conversion, but daily, each time something goes wrong, each time a plan fails, each time life delivers something you didn't order, asking, "What can this make me?" Not, "Why is this happening to me?" Not, "How do I make this stop?" But, "What is available to me here that would not have been available anywhere else?" This is the habit. Once a day, especially on difficult days, find the thing that went wrong, the thing you wish hadn't happened, and ask that question, not as performance, not as toxic positivity, with genuine philosophical curiosity. What can this make me? Marcus Aurelius lost children. He governed during a plague that killed millions. He led armies in brutal, freezing campaigns. He was deceived by people he trusted and betrayed by people he loved. And yet the Meditations, written in the middle of all of it, reads not as the journal of a broken man, but of a man being slowly, steadily forged by the very fires that could have destroyed him. He chose the fire every day. That is habit 9. Habit 10. Memento mori, remember that you will die. Seneca writes, with a directness that stops the breath, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing." And then, this, "The man who has lived well has lived long." The Romans kept a practice. When a general returned to Rome victorious, celebrated through the city streets, with crowds roaring, there was a servant appointed to ride behind him in the chariot. And that servant had one job. As the crowd screamed, and the laurels were thrown, and the glory was at its most intoxicating, the servant whispered in the general's ear, "Memento mori, remember that you will die," not to diminish the triumph, but to keep it real, to ensure the glory did not become delusion, to remind the most powerful man in that moment that he was still, beneath all of it, a mortal human being with a finite number of days. The Stoics made this the final and perhaps most essential practice. Each evening, a brief, honest acknowledgement that this day was one fewer remaining, not to invite despair, but to invite urgency, the right kind of urgency, not the frantic, anxious urgency of a person who fears death, but the clarifying urgency of a person who has accepted it. Seneca writes, "Perfecting your life is worth more than prolonging it." And Marcus Aurelius, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." The nightly practice of memento mori asks you to lie down each evening and briefly, without drama, without fear, consider, did I live today? Not merely exist, not merely move from obligation to distraction. Did I live? And if the answer is not fully yes, what will you do differently tomorrow? That question, asked with honesty every evening, has the power to change everything. That is habit 10. 10 habits, 2,000 years of field testing. And beneath all of them, a single, unified conviction that the Stoics return to across every text, every letter, every private journal. You are not your reactions. You are your choices. The world will continue to be loud, unpredictable, sometimes cruel, often unfair, and always beyond your complete control. That has not changed in 2,000 years, and it will not change in the next 2,000. What can change? What the Stoics devoted their entire philosophical tradition to demonstrating is the relationship between that world and your inner life. The morning audit, the pause, the evening review, negative visualization, voluntary discomfort, the view from above, the discipline of speech, service, amor fati, memento mori. These are not life hacks. They are not motivational strategies. They are not things you try for a week and abandon. They are a practice, in the same sense that a musician practices, that an athlete trains, that a craftsman returns each day to refine their work and the craft. Here is your own character, your own mind, your own life. Marcus Aurelius, a man who arguably had more reason than anyone in history to be consumed by ego, entitlement, and distraction, chose every single morning to return to this practice, not because he had mastered it, he says so himself, but because he understood that the only real failure is the failure to try again. You are not going to master emotional sovereignty tomorrow. Neither are we. But you can begin today. One habit, one morning, one pause, and then again the next day, and the day after that. That is Stoicism. Not a philosophy to be believed, but a life to be built, one day at a time. Before you go, I want to ask you something directly. Of these 10 habits, which one do you already practice? And which one have you been avoiding? Leave it in the comments below, genuinely, because what you resist is often where the most important work lives, and naming it is the first act of courage. If this video moved something in you, if even one idea landed somewhere real, share it with someone in your life who you believe could use it. That act of sharing is itself a form of service, and the Stoics would approve. If you're not yet part of this community, subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics. We build these videos for people who take their inner life seriously. If that's you, you belong here. Until next time, keep examining, keep choosing, keep building. Memento mori. And more importantly, memento vivere. Remember to live.